Chapter 29. Timothy Young's nurses graciously escorted the group up to see the doctor. He was lying down in a long chair reading a book. He removed his glasses as they entered his office and stood up. "Dr. Young," said the nurse, "these individuals insisted on speaking with you about a plague in the Rocky Mountains." "A plague?" asked Timothy. Could this be the sleeping sickness that Drew Baker was going to investigate? "We found a number of individuals burning with fever," said Sig. "We believe it is genetic." "Genetic?" asked Timothy. His voice sounded very similar to the voice of Daniel, and it made several of them smile to see the similarity. "What led you to that conclusion?" "How can I put this?" said Sig. "I have no idea how a plague could be genetic, but our doctor was checking the patients, and he thought it was genetic." "That's extremely serious," said Timothy in a concerned voice. "Have you brought some samples for testing, or for what purpose have you come?" "Well, we were talking to Erica Kingsley," said Sig. Timothy's eyes grew wide. "She thought you might have heard about it." "Hang on," said Timothy. "You talked to Erica Kingsley, and she actually spoke to you?" "Well, yes," said Sig. "What are you really after?" asked Timothy suspiciously. "He does not believe us," said Row 82. "You're quite perceptive," said Timothy with a hint of sarcasm. "I am supposed to be," replied Row 82 coldly. "He has the key of perception," explained Sig. "What?" asked Timothy. "Where is Amanda Madsen?" "We don't have time to explain it to you," shouted Kirana. "Amber?" exclaimed Timothy. "Why are you here?" "Who is Amber?" asked Kirana. "Wait," said Timothy as she looked carefully. "You're not Amber, but you look quite similar to her." "Amber must be Erica's daughter," said Row 82. "Who are you?" asked Timothy. Jennifer stepped out from behind the others. "Hello, Timothy," she said. "Jennifer Cedar," said Timothy. "This is your doing, isn't it?" She nodded. "You're curious about more than just sleeping sickness," said Timothy, "aren't you?" "So the truth is that a terrible destroyer is about to be unleashed on the world," said Sig, "and we mean to defeat it." "So everything that Aaron Pratt said was true after all?" asked Timothy. Jennifer nodded. "Well," said Timothy with a sigh, "I haven't heard about it being a genetic plague. Truth be told, I have been more focused on researching treatments for individuals with impairments. I am looking into restoring hearing and speech for those that are deaf and mute, and devices that will aid those that have difficulty seeing. I'm also researching artificial muscles to help those that are immobile." Both Stephanie and Row 82 gasped when they heard these words. Stephanie wondered about technology that would help the mute be able to speak. Row 82 was shocked because augments eventually used all of these techniques to aid those that already had strong abilities, rather than to aid those that did not. "If someone had a genetic-based attack," continued Timothy, "I would need to get samples to verify this." Sig lowered his head. They had been in such a rush to get to Erica, and so confident that Daniel Young would find a solution to the plague, that they had not bothered to try and get samples. "Nothing in your experience fighting demon worshippers indicates the use of genetic-based attacks?" asked Kirana. "You are very much like Erica," said Timothy with a slight smile. "I'm sorry. To answer your question, the only one that would be involved in genetic testing would be the necromancer, Catherine Page. But we never found her, and her followers were more interested in raising the dead to attack the living rather than genetic engineering. And we have no idea where she might be," said Kirana with a frown. "I'm sorry I don't have more information," said Timothy. "You could try contacting Drew Baker in the capital, but I doubt he will know much more than I do. The council just hasn't been the same for the past few years." "Thank you for your time, Doctor," said Jennifer. "Of course," he replied. They followed the nurse out of Timothy's office and toward the elevator. As the doors of the elevator shut, Lucas turned to Sig. "I don't get the impression that chasing down council members will make a difference," said Lucas. "What do you think we should do?" asked Sig. "Let's head back to the cavern," said Lucas. "If the destroyer comes, we will want to be near our healer. One way or the other, the time it will take to get there from here will give some of us the chance to use our keys." "How much do we want to use our keys?" asked Jonathan. "Joshua Beckman went insane in the mind realm, and it sounds like Aaron Pratt wasn't all there either." "What else is there?" asked Lucas. "We have some general information, but no solid leads. If we knew where to find the Archdemon's hand members, it might be different." "So you think that the destroyer is still tied to them?" asked Sig. "The destroyer wasn't using augment tech," said Lucas, "and he wasn't using a divine key. I think the only plausible explanation for the source of his power must be tied to demons." "I'm gonna ride in your van this time," said Lizard. "I could use some sleep." It was not long until they got into the vehicle. As Row 82 began driving, he turned back to Jennifer. "He seemed a bit apathetic. Is he always that way?" he asked. "No," said Jennifer. "He's just focused. He does not really like to be interrupted. It's possible he knew more than he shared with us, although I believe he was being truthful when he said he did not know the source of the genetic plague." "I see," said Row 82. He returned his focus to the road. "Those of you that can see things with your keys," said Sig with a smile, "we need you to find a lead for us. Jonathan, see if you can find the necromancer and see if she has something to do with the plague. Lucas, see if you can find out where it came from. Stephanie, see if you can figure out if it will have anything to do with the destroyer." None of them were looking forward to these tasks, but each of them understood the importance of finding something that could lead them to their enemy. As Jonathan touched his key, his eyes began to glow. Soon he felt himself walking in the mind realm. The transition from sitting in a quickly moving van to walking on the ground made him stumble, but it was obvious that this was not a physical shift in momentum, since he did not skid across the dust. He got to his feet and looked around. "Now how am I going to find Catherine Page?" muttered Jonathan as he thought about how difficult the task might be. "Why would you be looking for her?" came a voice from behind him. He whirled around and found Victor standing there with a puzzled look on his face. "Seriously," said Jonathan, "why do you look like Victor Lee? Who are you?" "I asked first," said Victor. Jonathan frowned. "Fine," said Jonathan. "We're trying to find a lead as to the cause of a genetic plague in the Rocky Mountains. We're hoping it will lead us to find out about who the destroyer is and how to defeat it." "Catherine Page is a vile, greedy, selfish, morbid individual, but she is not the cause of the destroyer," said Victor. "In fact, she would view the destroyer as a threat to her power." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "So, who are you, and why do you look like Victor Lee?" pressed Jonathan. "Until your council has gathered the 9 divine keys, you will not understand," said Victor. Jonathan opened his mouth, but it took a moment before he spoke. "Does Jennifer Cedar understand?" asked Jonathan. "She was a part of a council of 9. "No, she does not understand," said Victor. "You were going to try to read her mind if she did, weren't you?" "I admit I was tempted," said Jonathan. "Why doesn't she know?" "There were 3 councils of 9, said Victor solemnly. The intensity of Victor's voice made Jonathan a bit uncomfortable. "Right now, you are in a time when you will witness the fall of the Middle Council, and the end of what you have heard is the Golden Age," said Victor. "You are a part of the last council." "The last council?" asked Jonathan. "I thought we were destined to succeed." "That's an odd thing to think, since you are planning on changing destiny," said Victor. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. "There's no need to be snide," said Jonathan. "Can you help me find Catherine Page?" "I could, but that would be less efficient," said Victor. "How so?" asked Jonathan. "You aren't even aware that an expert tracker is here?" asked Victor in surprise. Jonathan looked around but saw only oblivious spirits in the mind realm. Victor pointed up where a glowing hawk circled far above. "Sam!" exclaimed Jonathan. Sam shrieked loudly. "Catherine Page is our snake today, Sam." Sam shrieked and began flying away. Jonathan chased after. Every step caused the scenery to change. They went from foothills to mountains to deserts to grasslands to swamps. At last they arrived at a hut in the marshes that was surrounded by tall, green-cloaked figures. Flies swarmed around them as though they were already dead, but they did not seem to be bothered by them. Sam shrieked again, and Jonathan walked into the hut. Inside the hut stood a short, slender woman. She had pale skin and gray eyes. Her hair was a mix of black and silver, but Jonathan guessed she was only about 20 years old in appearance. She wore a green cloak as the others did, but about her neck was a large black key. Jonathan knew he had found her. He approached her and held his key. "What do you know of the plague in the Rocky Mountains?" asked Jonathan as his eyes glowed. "Only what Sarah Hawkins told me," said Catherine softly. Jonathan was surprised at how sweet her voice sounded. "And what did Sarah Hawkins tell you?" asked Jonathan. "She said that it was the sign of Abaddon," said Catherine. "The cult of the Destroyer is making their move." "Cult of the Destroyer?" asked Jonathan. "What is that?" "Since the Council of Nine has pursued the Archdemon's hand, they believe they can harness the power by which the demon keys were originally forged," said Catherine. "Sarah believes they will succeed, but only partially." "What is the power that forged the demon keys?" asked Jonathan. "The power of human sacrifice," answered Catherine apathetically. Jonathan shuddered as he remembered the blood demon worshippers that had captured him and killed Sam. They had believed the same thing. He wondered if they represented what was left of this cult. "Who is the Destroyer?" asked Jonathan hopefully. "I don't know," said Catherine. "Sarah believes it is tied to the 3 traitors in the 3 councils of divine key bearers." "3 traitors?" gasped Jonathan. "The one with good intentions, the one with no intentions, and the one with evil intentions," said Catherine. "These 3 bring forth the signs of Abaddon, the catalyst of Abaddon, and ultimately the summoning of Abaddon." "What does that mean?" asked Jonathan. "I do not know," said Catherine apathetically. Jonathan frowned, but he could not be completely disappointed, since he had gathered some information. He closed his eyes as the mind realm evaporated around him. As Jonathan regained consciousness, he found himself sitting in the van speeding towards the mountains. Lucas and Stephanie were both unconscious, but their eyes glowed as they held their keys. Lucas found himself in a library filled with books. A young man was writing on the empty pages of a book. Lucas peered over his shoulder and recognized the chemicals as being sequences of nucleotides. Obviously, this individual was thoroughly involved in a genetic project of some sort. The young man wore a powder blue collared shirt. His hair was unkempt and there were perspiration stains near his armpits. His eyes were bloodshot, and Lucas wondered how long he may have been working on his project. He finished writing in his book and closed it. Lucas caught a glimpse of the title of the book, The Sign of Abaddon. The young man laughed and rushed out of the room. "That is exactly what you think it is," came a voice behind Lucas. He whirled around with a start and saw Victor. "Victor," said Lucas, "this is the formula for the plague." "Yes," replied Victor. "What is Abaddon?" asked Lucas. "Is that the name of the destroyer?" "You are correct," said Victor. "So the plague is tied to the destroyer," said Lucas. "You were not brought to this time accidentally," said Victor. "I thought that Jennifer chose the time," said Lucas. "No, she might think she did," said Victor. "But it is destiny that brought you here." "How can we be destined to change time if the events of time are set?" asked Lucas in a confused tone. "You are skeptical," said Victor. "You are not wrong to doubt fate." "Then we have free will?" asked Lucas. "We may or may not succeed?" "Well, you do have a task you were meant to accomplish," said Victor. "Your ability to use the divine key of origins is not an accident." "You didn't answer my question," said Lucas with a frown. "You're intelligent, Lucas," said Victor. possibly the most intelligent key-bearer ever. What do you think? I think that if there is a fate, changing it is probably more difficult than going back in time, said Lucas. I also think that because the divine keys existed before the Destroyer, their ultimate purpose may not have anything to do with the Destroyer. Victor smiled. Which means that free will may have a purpose here, said Victor, although perhaps not in the way that Sig believes. Then what? Asked Lucas. You cannot know the future, said Victor. You have the key of origins. You can only know the past. Ask the right question, Lucas. Lucas scratched his head. Before being pressed, he had thought of dozens of questions. He had so many things he wanted to know about the origins of the divine keys, the Destroyer, the Archdemon's Hand, and the Council of Nine. As he stood surrounded by books filled with ancient wisdom and speaking to a person that seemed to have all the answers, he could only think of one question. "Why do you look like Victor Lee?" he asked at last. "I did not choose my form," said Victor. "I do not know the person I resemble, and I cannot reveal my identity until the last council is fully restored." He paused. "But perhaps that is the right question." Lucas woke up and looked around. Jonathan was awake in the van, but Stephanie was still unconscious. Stephanie found herself in the mountain cave surrounded by patients in beds. There were tubes coming out of each individual lining the floor, but Stephanie could not tell to where they led. She turned around and saw Victor standing behind her. "What is this?" asked Stephanie. "What is this plague?" "Wrong question," said Victor. "What will it be? That's what you should ask." "Fine," said Stephanie with a frown. "What will it be?" "A catalyst of betrayal," said Victor. "Every Council of Nine has had a betrayer. One with good intentions, one with no intentions, and one with evil intentions." "Row 82, said Stephanie. "It's so obvious. That augment is not our ally." She looked up, but Victor was gone. She looked around in confusion. Daniel Young appeared to be hooking some of the tubes on the floor together. He was connecting the patients. "Have you found a cure, Daniel?" asked Stephanie. Daniel said nothing, but continued working. "You're trying to distribute the cure to all of the victims of the plague," said Stephanie in admiration. Suddenly a noise echoed from the edge of the cavern. Both Stephanie and Daniel spun around. Row 82 had a rifle pointed at Daniel. "Don't move, Doctor," hissed Row 82 angrily. "I knew it," whispered Stephanie. She ran toward Row 82 angrily, even though she knew it would not do any good in her vision. As the augment fired his weapon, Stephanie sat up with a start in the van. She looked around. Jonathan and Lucas were wide awake looking at her. She looked up front. Row 82 was driving the van up the winding mountain path. She calmed down, knowing that Row 82 had control of the vehicle, and that if she made a move, he was in a position to harm them. "What did you see?" asked Lucas. Stephanie got out her tablet. She breathed slowly and began typing. "Nothing," said Stephanie. Lucas and Jonathan looked at one another in surprise. Clearly they had expected more. She did not care, though. She was determined to wait for the right time. When Row 82 was vulnerable, when he was preparing to betray them, she would be there to kill him.